Today, we're diving into one of nature's most unbelievable secrets. It's a phenomenon that really makes you rethink what you know about life and creation. We're talking about nature's virgin birth.
So let me start with a question that sounds like it has an obvious answer. Can an animal actually be born without a father? You'd think the answer is a simple no, right? Well, it turns out nature has some pretty wild surprises up its sleeve.
The scientific name for this is parthenogenesis. It comes from the Greek for virgin creation, and that's literally what it is. It's when an embryo starts developing from an egg that has never been fertilized. Absolutely no sperm involved. And this isn't some sci-fi movie plot, it's a real strategy that life on our own planet uses.
To really get our heads around this, we're going to start inside one of the most organized societies in the world, the beehive. Because, as it turns out, honeybees have pretty much perfected fatherless reproduction. It's actually fundamental to how their entire society works.
Okay, so check this out. Honeybees have this incredible genetic system. It works like this. If the queen takes some sperm and fertilizes an egg, that egg develops into a female with a full set of 32 chromosomes. But, and here's where it gets wild, if she lays an egg without fertilizing it, that egg still develops. It becomes a male bee, what we call a drone, and it only has half the chromosomes, just 16. Just think about that for a second. Every single male bee has a mother, but he has no father. His entire genetic blueprint comes straight from the queen.
So how in the world does she pull this off? Well, the queen bee goes on one big mating flight in her lifetime, and she stores millions of sperm in this special organ called the spermatheca. And get this, that sperm stays viable for years. So every single time she lays an egg, she makes a conscious choice: release sperm to create a daughter, or hold it back to create a son through parthenogenesis. It's a mind-blowing level of control over reproduction.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's cool for insects, but it doesn't stop there. When we look beyond the hive, we find this same exact thing happening in much more complex animals, vertebrates, and that really changes the game for how we understand reproduction.
And the list of animals that can do this is just stunning. We're talking about Komodo dragons, hammerhead sharks, boa constrictors, even king cobras. This is not a one-off fluke. It's a real reproductive strategy that nature keeps falling back on, especially when a female finds herself totally isolated, with no males around. It's like an evolutionary backup plan.
One of the most famous examples of this happened back in 2006. A female Komodo dragon who was living in a zoo in the UK with absolutely no contact with any males laid a clutch of eggs, and they hatched. DNA tests confirmed it, and the whole thing was published in Nature, which is one of the most prestigious science journals on the planet. This was a huge deal.
And then you have the sharks.
In 2001, a hammerhead shark in an aquarium in Nebraska gave birth, which was weird because she had been in an all-female tank for 3 years straight. When they ran the DNA tests, they found the pup had 0 paternal DNA. It was the very first time anyone had ever proven parthenogenesis in a shark.
So, we've established that fatherless birth is a real, documented scientific fact. And this is where our source material asks a really interesting question. If this happens in nature, could we find echoes of this idea in ancient wisdom? And for that, it turns to a pretty surprising place, the Quran.
This is a really fascinating linguistic detail. In the 16th chapter of the Quran, which is actually named the bee, the text speaks to the bees. And in the original Arabic, the verbs it uses, like take, eat, and follow, are all in the feminine form. Now you have to remember, back in the 7th century, the common belief was that worker bees were males. But the text uses female grammar, which of course lines up perfectly with what we know today from modern biology. All worker bees are in fact female.
The source then shifts to maybe the most famous story of a fatherless birth ever told. In the Quran's account of Mary, her response to being told she'll have a son is pure biology. She asks, "How can I have a son when no man has touched me?" The angel's reply doesn't argue with her logic. Instead, it offers a totally different framework: divine will. Your Lord says, "It is easy for me."
The theological concept behind this, as the source explains it, is captured in this Arabic phrase, kun fayakun, which means be and it is. This phrase shows up in the Quran whenever it's describing an act of creation that happens outside the normal rules of nature. It's presented as the ultimate creative command.
So now we have these two very different narratives, right? One is a biological process, and the other is a theological account of a miracle. And what the source material does next is bring them together. Not to say they're the same, but to put them side by side and just see what we find.
So this table really lays out the comparison. With the honeybee, the mechanism is parthenogenesis, and there's 0 male involvement. In the Quranic account of Mary, the mechanism is described as a direct divine act, and again, zero male involvement. Now, the source is really clear here. It's not saying these are the same thing at all. It's just pointing out this fascinating parallel, that the concept of birth without a father exists both in the book of nature and in the book of Scripture.
So here's the big idea that the paper is putting forward. The very existence of parthenogenesis in nature acts as a kind of proof of concept. It shows us that, in the grand scheme of things, fatherless birth isn't a logical impossibility. And, the source argues, this completely reframes the whole conversation about a miracle. It's no longer something that breaks the laws of logic. Instead, it's an act that transcends the usual laws of nature, performed by the same power that created those laws to begin with.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, the source suggests that maybe we're just looking at two different, but not necessarily competing, ways of knowing and understanding our world.
Let's just wrap up the key findings. On one side, we have parthenogenesis. It's a real, observable, biological fact. On the other, we have an ancient text that happens to contain these oddly specific, scientifically accurate details about bees, and also describes a fatherless birth as a divine act. The source concludes that science is brilliant at describing the how, the mechanisms of nature, while revelation is more focused on the who and the why behind it all.
And the paper finishes its analysis with this verse, which really feels like an invitation to a journey of discovery. It sort of frames the whole process of exploring nature, looking for signs in the horizons and even within themselves, as a way to get closer to some kind of deeper truth.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. If this kind of parallel can be found in the life of a honeybee, where else might the patterns we're discovering in science and the wisdom found in ancient texts overlap? You know, exploring that question might just give us a richer, more complete picture of our world.